Bit of a shocker out of Amazon. Apparently, Amazon has just acquired full control of James Bond, which sounds a little wild if you're not up on the news, but hear us out. You might remember not long ago, Amazon acquired control of Bond, pretty much everything but creatively. The original family, Barbara Broccoli, she kind of hung on to the creative rights of Bond, and since the last movie, the series has kind of just been locked up and hasn't really gone anywhere. But now, Barbara Broccoli seems to be stepping back, and suddenly Amazon is just cleared the runway to make whatever they want. Podcasts, TV shows, movies. I mean, Bond is coming, whether you like it or not. What do you know about this, Andy?
So the Broccoli family has held on to the creative rights of James Bond, so kind of since the beginning, since the 60s. Barbara Broccoli actually inherited this from her father. And so it's a huge thing, and they've been incredibly protective of the brand. Like, they don't want to do TV shows or games or anything like that. And they were kind of just sitting on the property. They weren't letting Amazon greenlight anything after No Time to Die from 2021. That was, of course, Daniel Craig's last outing as 007. And we were kind of on the hunt for a new Bond, but they will not greenlight anything until they greenlight a script, and they were not allowing any of that. But some wheeling and dealing behind the scenes has gone on, and which is a nice way of saying that they probably got a really big check. And now Amazon is clear to start making shows or podcasts or games or any other kind of James Bond supplemental properties, which I think is really cool. I'm kind of excited about that.
Yeah, Barbara Broccoli is in her 60s now. Like, totally seems like a reasonable place to step out of the family business. She's been doing it her whole life. Amazon bought MGM for 8.5 billion in 2022, and Andy and I were talking about this just a few weeks ago here on the show. Why have they not been able to get a Bond project off the ground? Like, what's the problem? Who is the linchpin? And it seems like it was Broccoli. She was just saying, nope, this isn't good enough. Nope, I don't like this. Nope, this doesn't work. And it's tough, man, because when you dig into it, like, I know Ian Fleming wrote a lot of Bond novels, but they have pretty much scraped everything out of those books, man. Like, they've made 25 movies now. They have exhausted the supply. There is no big secret supervillain. They don't have a whole lot of like really big new idea. Like, they've used a lot of it. And like, just the recent Bond, like Craig films were reusing a lot of old elements like Spectre and Blofeld. Like, now they need to find a young kid, probably in their 30s, who's got to walk this like perfect line between like dapper and a gentleman, but also like a I don't know, a fire starter, somebody who really chases after what they want and passionate. Like, and I know Amazon obviously has the war chest to do this, but like I don't know if I got the confidence in them creatively. Like, they for all of their good hits, like, they've sure made some misses. You know what I mean? I think of like Reacher, which is fine, or like The Wheel of Time, which is like kind of turning out to be a bust. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't have a lot of confidence in Amazon for 007 here.
I'm a little bit more positive. I think the industry as a whole has seen the missteps that Disney has made. Disney was trying to crank out too many movies too soon and shows, and they really watered down both the Star Wars and Marvel brand, and they've learned from that, and they're backpedaling some. And I think the rest of the industry has learned that too, is like, you can overdo a good thing. I'm a fan of some Amazon shows. I really enjoyed the Fallout show that came out last year. I've heard Rings of Power is really good. So there's definitely potential. I think as long as they don't overdo it. Like, I would definitely watch like an 8-10 episode Bond show. Definitely go into any movies they do, and then who knows how else they'll branch out. But I mean, you buy property to be able to capitalize on it.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, there are some better victories than me talking about the stuff that I wasn't personally into. Like, clearly they've got some success. And you're right. Like, there could be a Bond podcast, right? Like, you can do a Bond TV show, young Bond, old Bond, dad Bond, Kingsman Bond. You can go wherever you want. World War II 007. Like, you can go any direction here. Like, you can build a whole John Wick verse out of like what's potential with Bond here. So we'll see. Like, it feels a little bit like somebody's like yanked the rug out from under anybody who was like really sticking on old Bond. But at the same time, like, dude, it's got to move somewhere. It's stuck. Like, the whole series is in hibernation, right? They're on lockdown. It's like, so moves are going to happen. And that's a good thing, ultimately, for everybody. So here's to more Bond, man. I can't wait to see who they pick. It's going to be somebody. It's going to have to be somebody good, that's for sure. Our
Yeah.
next story this week, big change up in leadership at Star Wars, which is nuts. Kathleen Kennedy, Lucasfilm boss, is expected to retire this year. This was a weird story because this wasn't a big formal announcement from Disney. They didn't like do D23 and have her come out on stage and like run a presentation where they're like, oh man, over the years, her storied history working with Lucasfilm all the way back from like Raiders in 81 to Star Wars in 25. None of that. This like dropped overnight. And then Hollywood Reporter picked up and ran with it. It's not exactly like a groundbreaking story. She's been in the business for years, but it's a shakeup. It's Star Wars, and I figured it was worth mentioning here, even if we don't have all the details yet. What do you know about this, Andy?
Yes, Kathleen Kennedy, who has been somewhat reviled as of late in Star Wars. A lot of Star Wars fans aren't real happy with a lot of her creative producing decisions. But she's a legend. She, as we were talking about before the show, I mean, she was a producer on Raiders of the Lost Ark and Back to the Future. And she's been on like every classic and big movie of the last 30, 40 years. So like she knows what she's doing and she's delivered a lot of hits. It's just, it's a different era now wherein things are modern. We have streaming, we have the internet. It's so different from the way you made movies 20, 30, 40 years ago. So it is, I mean, like I said, she's been doing this forever. A shakeup in leadership would probably not be a bad idea, but at the same time, I think Disney has decided how they're going to treat this property. And they say, Star Wars is a nostalgia property. We're not doing anything new. Everything's nostalgia. And we're going to keep doing our shows on the cheap and making it look, straight to streaming. I don't think any of that's going to change because it's like, it's filmed by committee, TV show by committee now.
Yeah, people have given Kevin Feige, Marvel boss, a lot of flack over how many of their recent films haven't been certified fresh right when they come out, right? There seems to be maybe a lack of quality in more recent Marvel features. And people say, hey, he had a great run here. It's time for a change. It's time for him to go. I've talked about that here on this podcast. Kathleen Kennedy over at Lucasfilm, kind of in a similar position, although they haven't been releasing films. Like, they've definitely had some success with the shows. We've talked about how Disney Plus has galvanized the Star Wars film library in a way that is difficult to come back from. But she has not been able to get any movies out. And like every movie they've announced at Star Wars events and then later quietly shuttered, like, God, Andy and I have talked through 10 of these things on this podcast. I swear to God, like there's so many bonkers Star Wars ideas that were going to happen. Patty Jenkins from Wonder Woman was going to have a Star Wars movie. The Game of Thrones guys were going to have a Star Wars movie. None of them ever materialized. It's difficult to keep that going, I think, at some point. And you got to say, hey, Kathleen, how much longer do you really want to do this? You know what I mean? Like, take the golden parachute, go ahead and retire, slide on out to the beach, get yourself a martini, and you'll be fine. For the rest of us, I got to know, who's running Star Wars? Right? What's next? And I think there's two people at the front of this campaign. A, Dave Filoni, who was George Lucas's like the come up guy. He was like this was the guy who was like his protege. He kicked off Clone Wars on Cartoon Network that turned into like an 8-season thing that Netflix ended up buying, built a bunch of new Star Wars lore. Thrawn, I think that's a Dave Filoni creation. Like a lot of what Star Wars is now comes from Dave Filoni. The other candidate, Jon Favreau, which I would not think Jon Favreau would be into. He's mostly a director who works on unique projects and definitely is in good with Disney. Outside of The Mandalorian and Grogu, which is kind of his big thing for Star Wars, like I don't think he's as dedicated to it as maybe Filoni. And I would think if you're going to pick one, you go for the guy whose whole life has been Star Wars, right? Like my man is just king nerd. But Favreau has produced Mandalorian and Grogu, right? Like he's got some big vision there. So what do you think, Andy? Like any thoughts on where this might be headed for Star Wars fans?
I can't think of a name, and it's also like with Marvel, it's Kevin Feige, and it's like, okay, who would replace him? Like it's not like directors. It's easier to say, okay, this director would be able to slide in or something. When it comes to producers, it's a much more kind of nebulous and unknown area. I think what is interesting is that Star Wars Celebration, which is in April, I wonder if that's where they'll actually announce who the new person is, and that's why we're getting this news early, so that when that announcement it can happen at a big event like that.
You might be right. The news comes ahead of Star Wars April celebration in Tokyo, where the future of the Star Wars franchise is expected to be unveiled. I might be a little skeptical because we reported on a few stories that have not actually come to fruition, but there's usually something that comes out of these things that comes true. So keep it here for more. Two more stories. I'm sorry, this week. Martin Scorsese's working on something out in Hawaii of all places, and I'm very excited to hear more about it. Andy's got the story. What do you know about this?
So he's working on developing in his like ninth collaboration with Leonardo DiCaprio, a crime not dra- a crime film, which also is going to star Dwayne the Rock Johnson and Emily Blunt, taking place in the 60s and 70s in Hawaii, about a mob boss. I assume this probably played by the Rock, as he's Polynesian, um, who has to both protect the ancestral homeland, like he's a native and he was interested in that, but also he's a crime boss and has to kind of fight other criminal elements as well as mainland corporations in this kind of crime struggle, very similar to it's being compared to like things like Goodfellas and the Departed, or a combination thereof. That's all we know so far. Apparently, it's a hot property. Everyone's bidding for it. Netflix, Amazon, everyone's trying to get their grubby little hands on it. It's a hot property. It's very surprising. Like, I mean, The Rock has made a lot of really bad films. It's kind of fallen out of favor, but he's kind of making a turn into more serious acting lately.
Yeah, this thing reads very exciting. Currently untitled project, but the talent behind it is stacked. It's Scorsese doing a 60s, 70s tropical crime drama. What's not to love, right? One of my favorite movies from him is Wolf of Wall Street. You combine that with like the heat of something like, I don't know, the first act of uh, Tony Montana in Florida in
Scarface.
golly Scarface. I kept wanting to say Goodfellas. You got Scorsese, who's obviously done a bunch of these bangers, alongside Leonardo DiCaprio, who he's worked with for a long time. You got Johnston and Blunt coming in, who both worked together on Jungle Cruise. Apparently, they were the ones that approached Scorsese and DiCaprio about the project. They said, "Hey, we got this script that we think is white hot. You should check this out." It all seems like it's going to be amazing. It's going to be neon pink and drugs. I'd say more, but I know we're on YouTube. Like this seems like it's going to be a winner, man. I feel like I'm going to be into this, and I'm glad. Like I'm glad that The Rock is stretching out. Like obviously he's doing some work with Benny Safdie over on the Smashing Machine for A24, which we should be getting trailer for probably next 6 months or so, right? Like he's doing big drama that way. He's getting a Scorsese project. Like good for The Rock, good for everybody. I'm into it. This sounds great. My only hope is that it gets a Blu-ray and it's not just trapped on Apple TV Plus like Killers of the Flower Moon, because that would be criminal. What do you think about this?
I'm super excited about this. I mean, this is Scorsese's back. He's really good at these gangster films, and I think they've slowly matured. And because Goodfellas a lot of times is accused of glamorizing the mob and criminal lifestyle, and his more recent pictures like The Irishman and Killers of the Flower Moon are kind of stray away from that. Like it focuses on the real negative side of living that kind of life. So it's interesting to see his work kind of mature that way. And that's, I mean, gosh, it's what a pitch. Like it sells
Yeah.
itself.
I know. Like I just like it. It's like people joke about like scripts made by AI, but like, dude, this thing is like tailor made for me to buy a ticket the day it comes out. Like that sounds so goofy. I hope it's 3 hours and they say the F word a million times. One more story this week from the box office. Captain America's second week. I had to know, how is Captain America going to do in week 2, right? Open to like a double holiday weekend. Going to be some drop off for sure, just like all the other Marvel movies. Turns out it's doing okay. And meanwhile, the monkey's doing not so bad. What do you know about this story, Andy?
So Captain America did come out on top with 28 million, but a really pretty steep drop off, about 67%. What they're now dubbing the Marvel drop, where a lot of Marvel films have a very strong opening weekend and then just kind of crash second weekend. Sadly, it kind of said not the worst drop ever, not as bad as the Marvels, which had like a 75% drop off. So the Marvels still catching strays years later. So it's not bad. It needs to make Cap 4 needs to make about 425 million to break even. It'll probably get close to that, especially when it comes to VOD sales. So they'll probably make okay, and it just needs to not be a bomb. And I think it has crossed that. Meanwhile, Osgood Perkins' The Monkey opened up to 14 million, the second biggest opening for Neon, behind Longlegs, which is also an Osgood Perkins feature from last year. So he's doing great work with them. That was also a $10 million film. So again, he's an advocate for small filmmaking that can make a big impact. In at number 3 is Paddington 3, Paddington in Peru, which continues to do well. And a somewhat sleeper hit, Ne Zha 2, the Chinese animated film, which is approaching $2 billion globally, came in at number 4. So kind of a wild weekend.
It is a wild weekend, dude. Cap opens to a double holiday weekend, Valentine's/President's Day. It's a long weekend. Does great. Bit of a fall off, but not as bad as Marvel's seen in the past. Probably a good indicator. If I guess you could read that as a good indicator. B, The Monkey's crushing it for low budget horror, and why shouldn't it? We've talked about this in the past, dude. You make a movie for $10 million with big advertising, you're probably going to make your money back in one weekend. It's a great strategy. It's a great strategy. Like, what a great way for smaller filmmakers to get more stuff made. I know Osgood Perkins is weird. It's been a lot of fun reading the reviews on The Monkey. I think people are pretty divided on it, but I'm glad we got to check it out for the show. We checked that out, I think, just last week. You can roll back and see our old episode. As for Paddington in Peru, weird pick, dude. Like, if you had told me a few years ago that Paddington 3 was going to come out, and no, not that many people were going to see it, I would have thought you were nuts. I would have been like, I'm going to be one of the first people in line. The first 2 films are Paul King films. Paul King, the guy who made Wonka, a movie that I thought was going to be lame and turned out to be pretty good. Like, those first 2 Paddington movies are a treasure, and it's wild to see the third one come out and just not really make a splash. And as for splashes, the highest grossing animated film of all time comes out in America and nobody sees it. Crazy, dude. Like, I hope we can go see it soon. In fact, keep an eye on what we're watching coming up. You might be surprised at how soon we end up seeing it, but it's weird. It's just a weird after Valentine's weekend at the movies. You know what I mean? Like, not quite up is down, left is right, but like no big playmakers, and like the ones that I would think would do well kind of aren't. Like, I don't know. Just kind of a funny reflection.
I did want to mention that we saw The Monkey early, but for regular releases, there was a preview of Osgood Perkins' next film, which is actually coming out in this October. So the man is working, I think, called The Keeper, and I completely forget what the plot is. Maybe it's about a couple that goes on like a cabin retreat, something like that. But this was a big surprise, and we didn't get to see this preview because we saw an earlier screening of the movie. But if you're going to see The Monkey this weekend, be sure to stick around for that. But that was also some news that Osgood Perkins has yet another film coming out in 6 months, which is crazy.
Yeah, my man's on like the Wes Anderson circuit. He's doing 2 films a year. It's nuts. Why not, right? Like they seem like small productions. Like he seems like he keeps it together. Like I would imagine Neon's going to keep greenlighting him for a while. Great. Shout out to Osgood Perkins. We should talk about our first film. My God, we've covered so much news. We got to talk about our first film of the episode, and I'm looking forward to this one. This is offbeat and not an area we usually stray, but we both happen to have access to Apple TV Plus this weekend, and we figured, you know what? Why not? We should check it out. Andy's gonna be taking the summary on it. Andy, please take it away.
The Gorge